all the trees. Here comes. Woo! There it is, folks. Big plug on it. Oh my God! Oh, huge log! Good morning, everybody. This is a live extreme weather briefing as we have a lot to talk about here across the state of Colorado into southern Wyoming and down into northern New Mexico. And we do have a continued flash flood and debris flow threat, especially off of those those wildfire burn scars. The ones from last year are definitely most at risk at these debris flows, the ones that have not yet cut loose yet, as we say it. But this one was actually intercepted a couple of days ago. That was off of the Pine Gulch Fire burn scar. And here you can see the radar image that shows that storm. This is just as I was targeting it. You can see that it's well in the heart of that Pine Gulch Fire burn scar. I was live on Facebook when I first identified this storm as well. And oftentimes these big time rainmakers like that will usually have this bean-shaped appearance, almost like a transient supercell structure. You could even see multiple inflow notches inside of the reflectivity pattern of this storm, and this big blob of high reflectivity that's relatively compact. It almost has a transient supercell look to it. These are the ones that are really dropping big time rainfall, and that Pine Gulch Fire burn scar is right like this area, just to the northwest of Quebec. Well north of Grand Junction as well. So I knew that this was falling right in the heart of the burn scar. Once I got the target storm, then I went to the topographic maps and started to identify the creeks that might be impacted by this rain footprint. And one of the ways to identify the rainfall footprint, of course, is hourly and storm total rainfall data. And that white location right at the center of that debris flow there, right at the center of the Pine Gulch Fire burn scar, that white there is pushing 3 inches storm total, and likely the radar overestimates rainfall from these storm systems a little bit, especially those that are packed with soft hail or grapple. They can usually show a little bit more rainfall than actually fell, but this was likely in excess of a 2-inch rainstorm over an hour period. And really, if you have about a half of an inch of rainfall over an hour period, that's sufficient to generate a life-threatening debris flow. And when I was approaching this storm, I wasn't sure if whether to target a creek off the western edge of that rain footprint or the couple of creeks off the eastern edge. The Pine Gulch Fire burned on top of a plateau here to the northwest of Quebec, well to the north of Grand Junction. So really, if you get rainfall within the middle of that burn scar, then you're going to get creeks flowing in all different directions off that elevated plateau. And those are the ones that I targeted for that debris flow potential. And I targeted Kimball Creek, which flows off to the west, right out of the heart of that storm total rainfall max. And thankfully got a little bit lucky. The debris flow, a portion of that debris flow went down Kimball Creek. I also had the North Fork Rowan Creek just off to the south of it. That one also had a debris flow that wasn't quite as big as Kimball. And then you have Rowan Creek further north as well that was also impacted. And I spoke to some residents along Rowan Creek there to the northwest, well to the north of Grand Junction. And they said that they were impacted by a debris flow with a wall of debris that was over 20 feet high in the front wall of that flood, and that caused quite a bit of damage to their property there on Rowan Creek. I did also see some damage from the mud flow on Kimball Creek, the one that I intercepted as well, there on Kimball Creek Road to the northwest of Quebec. But the key is to think like a fluid, and I learned from the best. The flash flood guru, David Rankin, taught me this technique of intercepting these flash floods. There you can see the storm total precipitation, and these storms are actually propagating off to the south. And instead of just having that one consolidated footprint over Kimball Creek, it actually spread a little bit of rain also to the south of that, over the North Fork, Kimball Creek as well. You can see the storm propagating off to the south, dumped rainfall, hourly rainfall in excess of an inch, well to the south of that max as well. But this here was the max rainfall that fell, and that's because you had that transient supercell structure. You had other storms that were merging within that heavy rainmaker. And a lot of times I also look at reflectivity to see if there's just a little bit of spin within the reflectivity pattern, and that usually suggests that there is some late heat release, a lot of condensation, a lot of rain being produced, and anytime you get a very strong updraft with a lot of phase change from a gas to a liquid, you're going to release the energy stored in the bonds of the water molecule, and that's called latent heat. And you can release that latent heat throughout the column, and that can lead to lower atmospheric pressure falls and can lead to a little bit of a spin that the storm will take. So that's one way that you can identify these heavy rainmakers are going to produce a flash flood even before those flash flood warnings are issued, and that's by just looking at those subtle signs within the reflectivity pattern that suggest that it's going to be a big-time rainmaker. And the flash flood watch continues today over a large portion of Colorado. That's in effect until 10 p.m. tonight. And I am watching the East Troublesome Fire especially. These are some of those burn scars across Colorado that I'm watching today that have higher risk. You've got the Cameron Peak Fire burn scar off to the north in orange. This is a map from the National Weather Service. You can also see the East Troublesome Fire there to the north of Granby, to the northwest of Granby as well. A very large burn scar. And these are actually the three largest fires in Colorado state history: the East Troublesome Fire, Cameron Peak Fire off to the north, and the Pine Gulch Fire there to the north of Grand Junction. But today, this East Troublesome Fire is right in the crosshairs, this burn scar. So I'm looking to the northwest of Granby for those big-time rainmakers, those bean-shaped reflectivity patterns with a little bit of spin to form over the East Troublesome Fire burn scar. Hall Creek is one of those creeks that I'm watching that flows from northwest to southeast off of that plateau where the East Troublesome Fire burned, and there is a burn scar up there. So I am watching that zone to the northwest of Granby to see if any near stationary rainmakers are able to develop, and then I'll be blasting off to the northwest and try to intercept a debris flow. I'm also watching this area over the higher terrain to the north of Grand Lake for a stationary storm there to develop and produce hourly rainfall totals well in excess of an inch. If that happens, then a debris flow will head from north to south toward Grand Lake, probably even entering the lake there. And of course, I'm watching the Cameron Peak Fire burn scar up here, and this one's already generated a deadly debris flow a couple of weeks ago down the Poudre Canyon, and that was a massive debris flow. Sadly, there were some campers that were situated along the Poudre Canyon that got swept away by that debris flow. They lost their lives on an annual trip out here to Colorado. That just shows you the destructive power of these debris flows. Even that one intercepted out near the Pine Gulch Fire burn scar certainly could be deadly if you find yourself too close to that creek, or maybe even one of those pieces of debris are able to snag your shorts and drag you into that debris flow. Could certainly be a very dangerous area. And here you can see where the East Troublesome Fire crossed the Continental Divide last fall. That was a really dramatic time period, one of the first observed cases where that has happened, where you have this massive fire complex, and it actually propagated over the Continental Divide and was approaching Estes Park. There were big-time mass evacuations of Estes Park, evacuating there with those orange apocalyptic skies last year. Now, a year later, the big concern are these debris flows. We have an energized monsoon pattern, so the good news with that is that we're getting a lot of rainfall in the mountains. I know that the mountain areas out here are not only dependent on soil moisture recharge during the winter with snowfall, but also precipitation from these afternoon monsoonal storms that will develop every day during the afternoon. But because we had such an active wildfire season last year, we have to watch out for another threat that are these debris flows. And I've become kind of obsessed with these flash floods and chasing down these debris flows, working out of Utah over the last 10 days, intercepting 6 or 7 front walls of these flash floods, starting with the new river flood there outside of Phoenix with the flash flood guru, David Rankin, who taught me his skill set out here for intercepting these flash floods. Then I caught pink eye from that flood, I believe. There was a lot of cow fecal matter there within that wash, and that likely gave me a pretty bad bacterial infection in the eye there. But that cleared up in about 24 hours, and then intercepted many more floods after that, including that one near Escalante, where we intercepted the front wall, that debris plug heading down Escalante River from Birch Creek. So now I'm back in Colorado here. A little bit of a drying out and subsidence of that monsoonal pattern over Utah off to the west and in Arizona off to the southwest, providing a much needed break from the monsoon conditions. A lot of flash flooding, loss of life out there in the desert southwest. Areas like Cedar City, Utah have been hit with multiple rounds of flash flooding with vehicles floating down those flash floods. Today, that disturbance within the monsoonal flow has migrated a little bit off to the east, so we are focused more on the Colorado portion, and including the Cal Wood Fire just to the northwest of Boulder. Even though that's a smaller scar, if you did get a storm that was able to anchor over that Cal Wood Fire burn scar, then I could very easily see a debris flow down washes like Left Hand Canyon up there to the northwest of Boulder. And I shot some video the other day in the Pine Gulch Fire burn scar, and when the rain starts to fall, you can actually see a shiny sheen or a shiny appearance start to form over the dark burn scar, the dark mountains off in the distance, and you can actually see those little debris flows start to form and flow into the main creeks there. And then it starts to develop a debris plug at the front edge of that flood that moves a little bit slower because of its interaction with the friction of the earth. And that allows the fluid portion of the flood to catch up with that debris flow. And that moves a lot faster. So all the runoff coming in from the gulches into the main creek piles up behind that debris flow, causing it to accelerate the debris plug along the front edge. And that's how these things form. And over these burn scars, the fires have burnt away large portions of the vegetation and topsoil, which normally would absorb that heavy rainfall falling into the mountains and then put it to good use. But because all of that was burnt away by these massive mega wildfires, two of them seen here, two of the largest ever in recorded state history in Colorado. Now these things are generating some big time debris flows, including the smaller scar over here in Cal Wood. I'm not sure if that one's cut loose or not. I don't think so. And based on what I'm seeing online, I'm not seeing any evidence of significant debris flows, even off the East Troublesome Fire. And that means that there's a large amount of debris stacked up there, sitting on the ground here within that burn scar that could easily be picked up by a flash flood if a storm is able to develop and dump especially over an inch of rainfall over about a 1 hour period. So now I want to recap that flash flood that I intercepted the other day. Using some of the map imagery here, I can basically run you through the way that I targeted this storm. This is Debec, Colorado. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, if it is Debecque or something totally different. But there you can see the Colorado River right there off in the southeastern portion of the screen. And Rowan Creek flows in and merges with the Colorado River. So I was analyzing these two rivers off to the north. You can see them flowing west to east. The southern one is Kimball Creek. Actually, Kimball Creek is up here. That's Rowan Creek off to the north along Highway 204. And then you've got Kimball Creek here off to the south that also flows west to east. Kimball Creek Road follows that creek. One thing I've learned through this process is that often these back roads will follow these creeks. Here you can see the North Fork, Rowan Creek. All these flow west to east off of that Cameron Peak Fire burn scar. And this is what David taught me too, is using this topographic imagery. You can see all these little washes that flow into the main river. This is the Dry Fork, Rowan Creek there that has also had some debris flows. Notice all these little washes like this one also. These will have little mini debris flows that will flow into the main creek, often increasing the size of the parent flood. And that's how they get going to begin with, is you get a little debris plug right in the front edge, interacting with the friction of the earth, moving a little bit slower than a raw fluid would over the friction of the earth. And that allows all the runoff to accumulate back behind it, helping to accelerate the plug down the terrain. And in the Grand Staircase of southern Utah, the terrain slopes more gradually, so the flash floods are a little bit slower moving up there. But that means that oftentimes they'll arrive in southern Utah even 5 to 6 hours after the rainfall is dumped by that parent storm over the higher terrain. And even without a burn scar, those storms can pick up logs from the forested terrain, and then they pass into the high desert off to the south where there's a lack of vegetation, but you still get that debris plug along the front edge. But when you get a burn scar, it means that there's even more debris associated with these flash floods. So that's North Fork dry wash right there. And here you can see Kimball Creek And this is the one that I chased. There you can see the road running just along the north side of the creek. And here further up the canyon, you can see the dark coloring there. That's all forest land and even burn scar in this case. Not sure if this satellite imagery reflects the burn scar or if that's just forested terrain from before that massive wildfire. But that dark coloring, those are ridges. That's the elevated plateau there. The white coloring off to the south, that shows where that creek is flowing. There's the river right there, that road that goes right along Kimball Creek. And so you can follow that creek all the way up to the heart of the burn scar. And that road goes all along it. And see how you have forested areas on both sides? The dark green there, or in this case, the black coloring there from all the charred trees and ground. That all flows from south to north on the south side and north to south. All of those little washes there feed into Kimball Creek. So when you get rainfall that develops over these scars, the water, the debris will flow off the higher terrain into these creeks, and then you get a life-threatening flash flood that will go down the creek. There you can see that creek just to the left of the road. That white dirt road is the one that I was intercepting that flash flood. And I went up the road a ways, pulled over, got out of my car, and I could actually hear the flash flood coming from a ways out, probably a mile or two off in the distance. So I knew that the flash flood was there. I launched the Dominator drone to scout out the size of it, to see just how large this flash flood was that I was dealing with, to see how close I could get to it as well. And I went up with the drone and then tracked that debris flow all the way down south. And there are some little makeshift lakes as well along this creek bed where locals on a property will often install just a little dam there to develop these big lakes, sometimes for livestock purposes as well. But the flood just roared right through these. It would hit those little dams, the debris would block, it would create a very massive dark lake with all that debris, and then it would release again, sending a plug back downstream, and it would kind of consolidate and hit one of those dams and turn into a lake again and kind of ebb and flow throughout its process. And that's the North Dry Fork Creek, which also flooded. And then just to the north of that one is Kimball Creek. There's Kimball Creek. This is the one that I observed the flash flood on, and there you can see that road, which often they follow those creek beds just because it's easier to go through the lower portions of the terrain than to build a road up and over those ridges. So conveniently for flash flood chasing, a lot of times these roads will follow these creeks. Problem is getting down to that creek and observing it from close range. But with a drone, I'm able to fly reconnaissance missions. Otherwise, I have to wait until that creek crosses the road, or I can go off-road a little bit on foot. And there you can see where that thing split apart there. Interesting. So this is why the flood split into two. You can see this common ditch there, and then the creek way out. So I actually had to run through that wash to get to the main wash, and then the flood almost side-lobed me because it was split in half at that point. And that wash kind of dissipated, and then the flood reconsolidated into the one single creek. This is when I got it, when I had that massive debris plug. It started to pass into this area of new growth as well. And this is right here, right where it crossed the road, right where it crossed Kimball Creek Road. This is where I got it when that massive log came through the underbrush like a T-Rex. You could see the underbrush start to wiggle a little bit, and then bam, it appeared. I was working this area here of Kimball Creek. And eventually that debris flow found its way all the way down to the Colorado River. Ran into Rowan Creek, joining forces with that flood as well. And there's been numerous floods down these creeks. Rowan Creek, as well as Kimball Creek, the East Fork, Salt River, off on the west side as well. I'm glad that I chose these eastward flowing rivers because I don't think that the western ones flooded quite as dramatically. Here you can see East Salt Creek that comes into pretty close to that rainfall max, flowing east to west off the higher terrain. So you also need to keep a very close eye on the direction that these rivers are flowing. And also, there you can see, it looks like there's a little plateau right along Matt Creek as well. There's the East Salt Creek that goes down to the south toward the Fruta area. And this is all the Pine Gulch Fire burn scar up here. All that green coloring that you see is largely charred well to the north of Grand Junction, to the northwest of Debec out here. And anytime you get big time rain, it'll send a debris flow down that higher terrain. But now let's take a look at the East Troublesome Fire scar here and look at some of the intercept candidates out there. Here is the Granby area. And so most of this fire was off to the northwest of Granby and to the west of Grand Lake, also to the north of Grand Lake. So here is a creek right here that flows into Grand Lake, Tanahutu Creek. That one flows off to the north. Tanahutu Creek, there you can see our classic road too that goes right along that wash. So if there is a storm that develops to the north of Grand Lake today and dumps in excess of an inch of precipitation in an hour, it'll probably ship a debris flow down Tanahutu Creek here that'll eventually arrive into Grand Lake. This would be a potential target. That one's off of that branch of the East Troublesome Fire that spread off to the north of Grand Lake. And the other area to watch are some of these creeks that go to the northwest over the higher terrain out of Granby. There's this one that flows into the Willow Creek Reservoir. Willow Creek, of course, is that wash, and of course that also has a road right along it. That goes off to the northwest, right into the heart of the burn scar. Also, Hall Creek is another one to watch up here. You kind of have a confluence here of Hall and Willow Creek. Could certainly see a debris flow down Hall Creek and Willow Creek there, impacting portions of Highway 25. But you still need a storm to develop over this region, but this is the heart of the East Troublesome Fire burn scar right there to the northwest of Granby. And I could show you that large fire there in yellow, the East Troublesome Fire to the northwest of Granby. That's all massive burn scar, one of the largest wildfires to ever burn in Colorado history. You also have the Williams Fork Fire off to the south. That one's mostly over rural terrain, not as much in the way of a debris flow threat off of that smaller scar on the southern portion of the screen. But the East Troublesome Fire burn scar is going to be a debris flow producing machine if any storms are able to develop over that scar. So let's take a look at radar here. I was also considering going south, again off of the Spring Fire burn scar down there to the west of Levita. That was a fire that I actually targeted about 3 years ago in 2018 in July during that active monsoon season. It went deep into the heart of that burn scar, and a severe thunderstorm developed to the north. Long track severe thunderstorm as well over the mountains, tracking north to south, and it moved over the burn scar. And I was sitting there right next to a wash that was starting to flow pretty high up in the terrain there, also outside of Levita, up near the Levita Pass area. There are a couple 14ers, I believe, down in that area as well. And I could see the massive charred hillside with that spring fire. And I got a little spooked when it started to hail, and I was worried that the whole side of the mountain was going to come down. Wasn't very experienced with chasing these debris flows. I had just really learned that summer from the flash flood guru. And so I retreated up the hill a little bit. Then I came back down just because I didn't want to miss it. And I had just missed that debris flow. It happened somehow during that period when I went up the hill during the heavy hail. Came ripping down that hillside. Even flooded a house that was located up there as well. And just a really fast moving flow up there too with that steeper terrain. So it was difficult to get that one. But that's the same burn scar that is at risk today. There have been a couple of storms that have been bubbling to the west of Levita that I've been watching pretty closely. So far, though, nothing that looks capable of generating a substantial plug. I also wonder if that burn scar is slightly old, about 3 years old. I wonder the effectiveness at a burn scar like that at generating a big-time flood. But right now, no flash flood warnings. Except there used to be one just outside of Telluride earlier. That one has been allowed to expire. So far, though, just some pretty transient pulse thunderstorms. This is the one that I'm watching out here near Levita Pass. That dumped about an inch of rainfall, at least being indicated by radar to the west of Levita. Right now, though, that's located just a little bit to the east of that burn scar. Most of that burn scar is located over the higher elevations there to the north of Levita and to the west of Levita out here, closer to Iron Mountain. So if that storm was able to anchor over this region right here, then I would be concerned about a debris flow being generated and potentially impacting the Levita area. But thankfully, those storms have moved off of the burn scar. Now they're impacting those areas out near Walsenburg. Just a special weather statement, but so far these have not been able to sustain themselves. A couple other storms near Colorado City as well, up near Canyon City. Colorado Springs has had a couple. Look at this outflow boundary charging off to the south there. Even though it's relatively moist, you don't have an abundance of deep layer wind shear, so these thunderstorms will go up, collapse, and then ship out outflow boundaries. And sometimes they can join forces with the Denver convergence zone and send it off to the southeast, but you can still see these moist southeasterly low-level winds out ahead of that boundary. Probably going to be some collisions and further development of storms along that outflow boundary, but I'm really watching this area out near the East Troublesome Fire, and I had noted a little bit of a cyclonically spinning gyre that was located over the mountains of Colorado. There you could see it still kind of spinning up here, and I was wondering if that might be associated with just a little bit of subtle lift that would be enough to encourage thunderstorm development out there over the East Troublesome Fire burn scar. But so far, it seems like that gyre, cyclonically rotating gyre, is more associated with subsidence behind an MCS that has since dissipated. You can see the remnants of that MCS up there over Fort Collins. Basically, these big complexes of storms produce an abundance of latent heat. They lead to those pressure falls at the low levels of the troposphere. You get a little bit of spin, then all the thunderstorm activity will dissipate, but you still have the spin left behind. And sometimes these gyres can be the focus of additional thunderstorm development with the heating of the day, with just a little bit of rising motion associated with them. You can see a couple updraft towers associated with that to the southwest of Granby. See those little showers that are developing there in the vicinity of Granby and to the northwest of Granby over that burn scar. So I'm watching this zone right here for thunderstorm initiation. And if that starts to happen during this briefing and I start to notice those echotops really growing, this is the hot spot that I think would cause a debris flow or a flash flood down Hall or Willow Creek there toward Willow Reservoir to the northwest of Willow Reservoir. Also, the creek there to the north of Grand Lake also is at risk to flood as that East Troublesome Fire crossed over the Continental Divide there, burning large sections of Rocky Mountain National Park. But this area right here is what I'm watching right now for the development of some heavy rain producing storms. I'll have to leave here relatively soon to get to that potential flash flood, but that's why there's an enhanced risk for flash flooding and debris flows off of the East Troublesome Fire burn scar. But if there are no storms, then there's obviously not going to be an issue. You're not going to take advantage of those precipitable water values. You're not going to get the hourly rainfall required to generate a burn scar. We had that dying MCS that was dumping just some light rain over Rocky Mountain National Park and over the East Troublesome Fire burn scar earlier today. Now it's dropping just some light rain over the Cameron Peak Fire scar, which has already cut loose a couple of times. If some of these convective elements are able to mature out there to the west, northwest of Fort Collins, then we could have the threat of another debris flow developing, especially to the west of the Rustic area, up along the Poudre Canyon. But so far, largely stratiform rain. Some heavier rain starting to develop on the eastern edge of that MCS. But I'm really most interested in the southwestern portion of this MCS, where there's been some heating of the day, and I could certainly see some slow-moving storms developing right over the heart of the East Troublesome Fire burn scar. So that's the zone that I'm watching for this afternoon. That's what I'm going to target if there is a flash flood warning or if this convection is able to mature just a little bit. Echotops are a great way to assess the robustness of that convection. And right now, most of the heavier precipitation and the more mature convection is located well to the west of the East Troublesome Fire burn scar. But this area here I'm monitoring for increased echotop height, basically showing that there's more robust convection capable of dropping more extreme amounts of hourly precipitation. So far, that area there to the northwest of Granby is relatively low-topped in nature. but I am watching it relatively closely for trends and debris flow potential. Right now, though, most of the more robust convection is associated with the foothills there to the west and to the south of Denver and into southern Colorado, where that moderate risk for flash flooding has been issued by the Weather Prediction Center. That includes the mountains to the west of Colorado Springs, to the west of Pueblo, the Spring Fire burn scar there as well as other burn scars. So we are starting to get some new model data coming in. So I can show you that really quick, and then I'm going to decide whether or not it is time for me to blast out of here and get some of these storms. Hopefully this thing hasn't frozen. Looks like it might have frozen. If it does, I'll just re-upload the recorded one. Computer definitely does struggle a little bit here with running all these maps. Damn thing cannot keep up with me. So let's look at the 3 kilometer NAM here, 6 hourly precipitation. And there it is. Look at that precipitation. You really want to look out for those purples, and at least a 3 kilometer NAM, which is my model of choice for these mountain storms and precipitation, monsoon, as well as high plains insanity. And in fact, it's basically my model of choice throughout. It definitely shows that outflow boundary zone to the south of Denver, near the Palmer Divide, potentially dropping some flash flood type rains in excess of 2 inches there as well. You can see that the 3 kilometer NAM is hinting at a little bit of a reinvigoration of that convection, and pretty close to the East Troublesome Fire burn scar. We'll keep an eye on that as well. 3 kilometer NAM is pumping out in excess of 1 inch with those storms. And down here near Raton Pass, you've also got an invigoration of that convection down there. That seems to be spot on, predicting those storms consolidating around Raton Pass, the Raton Mesa down there as well, and to the west. That's why that flash flood watch does extend down into northern New Mexico, as well as a large portion of the mountains of Colorado. And the Mullen Fire, well to the west of Cheyenne, over southeastern Wyoming, is another one that could generate some very dangerous debris flows. So let's compare the 3 kilometer NAM with the HRRR, which of course will have less rainfall, but basically just want to focus on the spatial patterns here and spatial similarities in the max rainfall between these two patterns. Interestingly, the HRRR shows a little bit less precipitation, less QPF down into southeastern Colorado. Really lights up that outflow boundary though, just to the south of Denver, and that's consistent with what we're seeing on radar, which tells me that this model definitely has picked up on that very accurately with that rain band setting up over the foothills to the south of Denver. The HRRR, though, really has a lack of significant convection there developing over the East Troublesome Fire burn scar and the Cameron Peak Fire burn scar as well. That's probably picking up on a lot of that precipitation being stratiform in nature out there. So that's what we're looking at here, everybody. In terms of these models, there you can see the burn scar that we are of course watching. Here is the video. We'll try to play this debris flow one more time. It's probably going to completely freeze, if not just totally shut down here, this live stream. Wish I could play this in real time, but clearly I'm having some memory issues with this live briefing. But there you can see that debris flow. All of that debris was from the heart of the Pine Gulch Fire burn scar. Look at that pollen, too, coming up from the new growth within Kimball Creek as that debris flow is hitting it. And this just shows you that that new growth within these washes is absolutely no match for the power of a debris flow. And you can see that massive log there as well coming in on that debris flow from east to west. It's definitely a big deal. Just completely boggled by... And I'm obsessed with these flash floods and intercepting them. Equally as much as tornadoes, just the power, the beauty of nature out there, the power of the flash flood. There's really nothing like standing in a dry wash and really not knowing just how substantial that flash flood is, but you can hear the roar miles off in the distance. Then the thing comes around a bend, shooting debris up into the air. And There's nothing more exhilarating than the power of nature on display right in front of you. But you also feel for the people that are sustaining property damage from these debris flows, that live along these burn scars as well. You definitely hope that everybody's going to be okay. I'm definitely aware of how life-threatening these debris flows are. So hopefully by posting these videos, it can at least shed a little bit of light on the true power of these debris flows, so that if people do see these flash flood warnings being issued, they'll take them seriously, especially those hikers and campers that are near these creek beds that are emanating from wildfire burn scars. Definitely it is capable of producing a situation like this, a massive debris flow like the one down near Kimball Creek. So thank you everybody for tuning in to my weather report today. I do wish I could play these in real time. Just going to have to make for some smaller file sizes a little bit. I'll be able to play these videos a lot faster without freezing like this. So thank you everybody for tuning in to this weather report. I'm likely going to head toward the Grand Lake area. I'm also preparing for my Varsity Tutors course, which is coming up on August 10 on wild summer weather, including hurricanes, wildfires, debris flows like this, and flash floods, heat waves, droughts. We're going to cover it all in the upcoming class on August 10 at 4 p.m. Eastern. And I'll be posting more and more about how you can sign up for the free class as well over the coming days. So thank you everybody for joining me for this weather report. Never stop chasing.